AI. It's changing the way we work, the way we live, and the way we exist. What is our role? How will it shape our jobs? And how will the media industry use it? This is an important question we will tackle today. Journalism is at the core of a healthy democracy. Will AI help or be that final blow? I'll be speaking with Pete Pachal. Pete has hope. Pete's expertise and understanding of all things tech astounds me. Like many of us, he has done a little bit of everything, but he's not sat back on his laurels of being on The Daily Show, CNN, and so much more as a reporter, thought leader, content creator, editor, and great guy. We talk about Pete's background, the future of journalism, his views, obviously, on AI today, some of his favorite AI tools, about Media Copilot, his latest endeavor. This is a really special episode because Sora was just announced and brought to life yesterday and captured the imagination of millions of people around the world. Pete is really impressive, and I appreciate that he took the time today for this podcast. It's Friday, February 16th. Again, I'm Aaron Cohen. This is Glitch Podcast, Episode 1. Thanks so much for listening.
Yeah, so I am a journalist by trade. So I have been a tech journalist for a couple of decades now, maybe even a little longer. Probably shouldn't even say how many years, really, lest your Gen Z viewers fly away in droves. No. So I was a tech journalist for a long time. I worked at companies big and small. I was at NBC Universal for a bit doing tech for them. I was at Mashable for a long time in the 2010s as the tech editor. I worked for Red Ventures for a little while, and most recently, my last real job was at CoinDesk. I was the chief of staff there, actually. So I've done quite a few different things in media and have watched it change quite a bit over the last few years. For a lot of reasons, there's stuff going on with search and social and audience relationships and other technologies, but the thing that's really clearly changing the craft at all ends, so in terms of the business, the content generation, and really how roles are being defined now, is AI. And I could see that happening really all throughout 2023. So I was at CoinDesk when ChatGPT came out, and like many other publications, we quickly launched a task force internally to sort of examine this and figure out if it's something we could use. And I was actually in charge of that task force at CoinDesk. And we tried a bunch of different things. So we prototyped a few different ways to use AI. I think the thing that was happening the most around then was kind of infamous face planting about using AI that a lot of publications sort of experimented with. So they tried to use AI to essentially scale up content and have AI write articles. And some of them had people checking them, but they weren't the right people. And some of them weren't checking them at all. Those were kind of the more fly-by-night operations. And it sort of concluded, oh yeah, this really doesn't quite work that well as a article generator. But the fact is, that's really just one use case. There are so many other points in the news production, gathering, and distribution pipeline where AI can speed up things, create efficiencies, possibly even surprise you, that it's just so clear it has been changing and will change journalism, news, and media consumption for years to come. So when I found myself not at CoinDesk because of sort of, it was one of the first, well, not, I wouldn't say one of the first, but it was part of the uptick in layoffs, certainly, as many media companies downsized. I won't go into that, but obviously CoinDesk had its own issues with the crypto market as well. And I was looking around for what I wanted to do next. And this idea of getting ahead of this AI wave, or at least trying to ride it a little better, seemed like the most logical thing. So I founded the Media Copilot. At the time when I did it, I honestly didn't know if it was going to be a newsletter that I was just kind of doing in my spare time while I was looking for my next gig, or something bigger. And it rapidly became something bigger. I mean, there was just a tremendous amount of interest. I got a lot of signups. We've got like thousands of subscribers now. I started offering classes, and those went really well. whether I was doing an hour or 3 hours or an hour and a half, the things I was showing people, because I was teaching myself at the same time of just learning all these models, all these services, all these different tools that create content for you with varying degrees of comprehensiveness and ease, and passing that knowledge on. It just seemed like something was really taking off here, and I'm happy to say it has. And now we offer classes on a regular schedule. We offer custom classes. We're consulting with marketing companies, PR companies, industry associations, journalists, one-on-one. And it's honestly really hard to keep up with demand. And now I'm just sort of faced with all the issues of building a business of like, okay, what do you prioritize? How do I make time to do sort of the business running stuff, like squaring the books, etc., while also still putting good content out there, because that's still the best engine to get more interest. So
Got it.
that's kind of my background and how I ended up starting the Media Copilot. It's
Eh,
really, like
yeah.
I say, it was kind of a bit of a survival mechanism to some extent, but I'm surviving, so it's going
Do
all
you
right.
have like an entrepreneurial background? Is your family an entrepreneur or founders or anything, or did you just are you the kind of the first in the lineage to try this to go out on your own?
No, not at all. No family entrepreneurs, no old money here. Was really just kind of putting myself out there and taking a big risk. I don't have a lot of passive income or what have you. It was really trying to leverage the best of my experience and aligning that with the industry I know really, really well. Like, I know a few things really well. I know tech, I know media, and to some extent, I know crypto and crypto media. And now I'm happy to say AI is one of the big things I know a lot about. And although there are days where I feel like I know nothing, because the pace of this industry, even if you restrict yourself to generative AI and content creation, is so fast. There is so many new things happening every week. Just this past week, when we're recording this, there was Sora from OpenAI. There was a new iteration of Google Gemini, at least as a product, because now they've done away with the Bard name and now it's Gemini, and they have new ways to access that. I know there's like a half dozen things I'm completely forgetting, but I mean, it's like every week there's all these new tools and new products, new businesses being created with AI. It is just breakneck. I get whiplash every
Unbelievable.
time I look at my inbox and see all the news and I've signed up for from all these newsletters, because everyone's covering it too,
Well,
including me.
I'd love to talk about your process and how you gather all your details and so forth. But maybe just what is the elevator pitch in your mind for Media Copilot? What is like your mission with it? And also, the other question I have is, did you have an aha moment to do this? And what was that like, if so?
Yeah, good question. So the mission is mostly to demystify and remove a lot of the fear that I think people still have with AI. It's funny, like I'm starting to get in a bit of an AI bubble when I talk to people and the services I deal with, and you kind of look at these online communities, and if you're pro AI, or rather, that's a weird thing to say, it's more like if you're immersed in AI, then you kind of get the sense that, oh, everyone's excited, this is interesting, and we're all happy. But then I sort of come out of that bubble and I talk to journalists and others who are still very skeptical of AI. And I think that skepticism, particularly from people who still exist today that are like, oh, I don't like this, I don't want this, I never want to use this, I think that's born out of fear to a large extent. And I don't think it's quite as quid pro quo as like AI is going to take my job, because I think a lot of the people that I know are fairly senior and understand what their value is, and the companies they work for understand their value as seasoned people. What I think they're looking at is what is, I think, a bit of a real fear to some extent with AI, which is that it's going to sort of atrophy good things about journalism and good writing. And I don't. I think there's some merit to that, and I can go into sort of details, but I do think a lot of the fear is unfounded with regard to the journalism profession, because even though there are a lot of places that we've seen will use AI to quote unquote nefarious ends, whether that's for marketing or just cheap content, the practice of journalism still requires humans and human insight, human ingenuity. That hasn't changed. I don't think that will change for a long, long time. Sure, like everyone talks about AI systems getting better by the day. And while that's true, I believe that the curve of AI is that if you think that the writing today gets us to about 90 to 95% of what a human can do, if you kind of accept that as a general rule, I would say the first 95% was a lot easier to do than the last 5%. And that last 5% is where journalists can really make a difference. And I really think that last 5% is not going to be conquered in the near term. As good as these systems are getting, they're going to get incrementally better going forward. And as much as everyone likes to hype up AGI or whatever the hell that is, I don't think we're going to get like human equivalent intelligence for a long, long time still. So
We're
I
not going
think
to have
journalists,
we're not going to have a AI call up a company for comment, and we won't be talking to journalists anymore anytime soon. It will.
I think AIs will start calling for comment, but to understand that comment and repeat back a question that is actually useful and probing where they need to probe with that human intuition, that's going to be very difficult to simulate. Like looking at the systems now, unless someone, OpenAI or otherwise, has some thing they're sitting on that is orders of magnitude better than what we have now, that's simply not going to happen for a long, long time. Well, someday will we have like data from Star Trek reporting at some point? Sure, but like, come on, that's centuries in the future. So this is what. So basically, getting back to the Media Copilot, I'm mostly trying to demystify and also excite to some extent, because when I do these training sessions with various folks in marketing, journalism, et cetera, and I show them just how these tools work and how easy they are to use, and sort of putting the connections between what you put in a prompt and what a context window is, and then for chat gpt specifically, if it's custom instructions or something like that, there's a few like things you can show them and they get it. They're suddenly like, oh, I see. Yeah, I didn't have to worry too much about this replacing me, but it actually does XYZ pretty well. And I think if I could just give one pragmatic example of that, one of the things that happened to journalists and reporters in the 2010s was that we all kind of had to become content marketers for a while, and still do to some extent, right? You had to figure out like how SEO worked, what the social networks were, and how to sort of speak the language of those networks just to get your content out there and competing with everyone else's content. And now I think one of the promises of AI is there's going to be a bit of a retraction of that, partly because social just isn't worth what it used to be. Same with search to some extent, but also because AI can handle it. Like I strongly believe, like in most CMSs, within the next 6 months to a year, we'll have generate for me buttons that essentially do what we would consider the Chrome around content. Like, so you write an article, and of course you have to write the tweet and the Facebook post and those meta headlines, and then the SEO headline. And come on, no one wants to do that. No one ever wanted to do that. I mean, there's a few people who are great at it. God bless them. I got pretty good at it, I think, but no one looks forward to that. If no reporter anyway. And now I think we're going to see pretty quickly that being done by AI, and it'll be essentially a drop down menu of auto generated responses you can tweak. So that's I think I would think that's something journalists can get behind.
Well, let's ask
This
that
thing that,
question.
yeah.
Have you spoken to your colleague journalists about AI? I have a lot of artist friends, and ask them about AI as well from that perspective as well, creating art, creating creative writing, and they're not always super positive. So, right, they are. They're some of them aren't worried at all. Some of them just think the tool don't think highly of the quality enough to really worry about it. What about journalists? Are they in general, from your experience, pro this sort of AI tool movement revolution?
In general, I would say there's still a bit of a stigma. So, not pro, though more and more every day are sort of seeing the value that it can bring to tedious tasks. And ultimately, why I want to demystify and excite is because these tools will, it's just inevitable. They will get used more in content and in distribution, and journalists need to adapt or die, frankly. I mean, as a profession to some extent. Now, all that said, the concerns that some of them have around these tools, I think, are valid but exaggerated. So, for example, like I think for most journalists that aren't just starting out, you mostly you're probably split between sort of two different. Not there's way more than two different kinds of articles, but there's kind of stuff you do quickly, like, oh, this is something on my beat, and I've got to crank something out really quickly on it, versus something that is really bespoke, like an enterprise reporting, you might call it, or a feature. And those are the things you really want to spend time on. And that really, you want to craft your sentences and you want it to really come out there and have an impact. And I think to a large extent, that feature reporting, that enterprise reporting, that's going to remain the same. That's going to stay human
Hmm.
because you want it to be, and that's really what's adding that sort of magic. I love those. Everyone loves those articles. Come on, you like sit back with a nice long piece from the New York Times Magazine on a Sunday afternoon. We if you're into news and into reading, that's awesome, and you want that human connection. But for those quick turnaround stories,
Mm-hmm.
particularly ones that are pretty rote, whether it's rewriting a press release or just a quick piece of news, a quick hit, as you kind of call it in the trade. I think a lot of that will either get AI written or AI assisted. And to be clear, I don't think any of that at this point should be going out unfiltered without humans in the loop. Humans are necessary for checking it because, again, any AI can hallucinate. The writing tends to be fairly soulless, and there's just things you need to do to help string thoughts together for these systems. But again, a fine-tuned system, particularly one trained on your publication style of writing, can do a pretty decent first draft.
Yeah.
You just need to sort of put it together. And I think that's to a large extent what Semaphore is doing with Semaphore Signals. That's a brand new product they just announced the other week, where they get an AI to both find and summarize news from around the world on a particular beat. And then a journalist comes in and strings it together and adds their own knowledge. That to me is the right way to use AI. Particularly, I would even say this is probably a necessity
Hmm.
to have the human be someone with subject matter expertise, because that we saw that early on. I know I said I wouldn't name names. I still won't. There was a tech publication that was doing AI generated
Hmm.
articles. They were being checked by humans. Problem was they were junior level editors without subject matter
Got it.
expertise. So even though they could correct for grammar and spelling, obviously, and style, and even to some extent some logical leaps, they didn't have that granular knowledge when the AI would just sort of make something up that was
So I
false.
want to jump off of that because you had mentioned, yeah, you might want to not mention that public publisher. I actually had that question for you. What do the what do the publishers and the lawyers and all of these people behind the scenes, the managers, think about their journalists using tools that actually write the first draft? So clearly they have already transcription services that they use. But this takes it another level to either summarize the key points. That's probably okay, maybe. But then, hey, I wrote the first draft with AI. I did a 10% brush up. Again, I know it's different with different levels of content, different types of content here. If it's just stringing together a bunch of startups that just got funding and putting them in a nice list for you for that first draft, maybe that type of article is totally fine. But in general, what is the sentiment in the industry? Not the journalists, because they're working hard and looking for tools to make them more productive, but the folks behind the scenes. Have you spoken to any of them or heard what the sentiment
Yeah.
is out there?
Yeah, to some extent, there is, I think the most forward thinking places have cautious optimism where they have learned from the missteps of those publications that went too far too quickly and are looking at a process that really is more like a co-pilot situation where most of the article is human written,
Hmm.
but particularly for content that is evergreen or, to be cynical about it, SEO optimized, you can lean on an AI to fill out parts of an article there so that the page is better equipped to rank on Google. And there's a bunch of tools that do this better than your sort of out of the box Chat GPT or Claude or whatever. So, but that said, there are guardrails. One, subject matter expertise is the main one, and there are the human. Like ultimately, by the time it gets to a publication, you might not even see a note about AI having
Hmm.
contributed because it was so sort of deeply embedded in that process. You could probably still detect it if you ran the article through an AI detector, but it would be only a chunk of the article somewhere, probably lower down. Again, those are the folks that are doing it ethically. Again, I'm not sort of talking about content operations that are essentially farms that are just cranking out stuff, because that's happening too, and it's affecting the whole ecosystem. Um, but the sentiment, like I say, I think for forward-thinking folks, it is that sort of cautious optimism, and editors are implementing it, and bit by bit, they're kind of figuring out the ways and places that AI can help. Now, I'll say this, I think the business managers love it in the sense that they
Right.
were the ones certainly pushing, let's just do this and cut down on overhead and crank up
Yeah.
output. It was a mirage. You can't really do that because then you're Sports Illustrated. I'll name them just because it was
Hmm.
such an infamous
Right.
case, and essentially the publication's now shuttered, not necessarily for directly because of that reason, but certainly
Didn't
contributed.
help.
Didn't. Yeah. Um, so so the business managers are all for, like, let's do more AI where we can. And the truth is, there are some roles that will likely, uh, if not fall by the wayside, change or become integrated into other roles. And I was mentioned social media already. Pray for the social media managers, those that are left. But I think that role will become much more sort of administrative and less content based. Obviously, you still need someone to manage it, but in terms of writing the tweets and all the things that go out on various networks, I think that's mostly going to be taken over by AI. Another one is copy editing. Now, the copy editor role and copy desks have been going away for years.
Hmm.
And certainly with AI now getting sort of really, really good at not just being an editor, but the better services can show you a paper trail. So you can sort of go back and see not just what it changed, but why. Um, that's it for almost all publications is going to be handled by software, which is too bad because I think a real life copy editor does have that extra that they can give by being kind of a subject matter expert. Because if you're at a traditional place like the Times, you're copy
Hmm.
editing on a specific desk, and you will know which questions to ask and how to fill in stories. And that will be at this point still better than ChatGPT, but really like those the services are getting so close to that. Like if you put an article into a generative system and say, check the internet and what am I missing? It'll do a good job of saying, like, here's a few questions to fill in if you can.
Hmm.
And does that replace the human entirely? No, but it gets pretty close. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but the old school copy desk, it's not coming back.
There is another sentiment out there. I was watching the All In podcast. They talked about it quite a bit. It's essentially one of the roles of journalism is seeking out truth and keeping the foundation of our democracy in check, holding folks accountable, that kind of thing. There's a lot of media companies going out of business right now. There's a lot of layoffs, right? And so, do and I don't think has much to do necessarily with AI at all. But
That's a
can
little bit.
Yeah, can
Just
you
you
comment on
wait.
that though? Like essentially, um, yeah. What do you think is the are you thinking that this is a bright future for journalism right now? Are we in a rough patch right now?
Well, we're definitely in a rough patch right now. There's no question
Yeah.
about that. Is there a bright future, though? That's a really, really, really good question. And I don't know, but I think there's reason to be optimistic. So, one is philosophical, and one might be a little more practical. And the practical one has more to do with AI. So, philosophically, the 2010s, when everyone was chasing scale, social media was giving tons and tons of traffic, and Google was giving almost as much. You can kind of, I think it's going to be looked back on to some extent as an anomaly. That was a weird time in media, and everyone was chasing scale, and it was a lot of it, just wasn't real. Like it was just traffic spikes and whatever the whims of the Facebook algorithm were, and that's not really having an audience. Like I think as painful as this time in media is, and as much as I personally wish it wasn't the case, because I want opportunities for my friends and myself to be out there, kind of like what they were in the 2010s. But this will ultimately be healthy for media because it's going to force every publication to really wonder what value they're bringing and who their audience is, and optimize for that, and really like figure out what the quality content those people are looking for and serve it up. And maybe that means for some companies that were chasing scale for the longest time, they are considerably smaller than they used to be. Again, I personally take no pleasure in that idea, but it is, I think, a reality. And I think if they can optimize for that in a good way, they will still have a good business. It just won't be as big as it was before. So that's kind of my take on what's going on with media broadly right now. So I'll get back to sort of the AI question, because this is a big wild card that's been thrown into everything I just said. Because search is still the number one way most people find their news, and because that service, searching the internet, is rather rapidly actually getting AIified. You could argue the zero-click searches Google was doing even prior to the current wave was part of that. Google was already, just for some queries, just giving you the answer. Now that there are a lot more, and now with generative search, if you opt into that, that's kind of what it defaults to. At some point, fairly soon, that's going to be the default for everybody. And for a large number of searches where people just want the answer, and it could be just an answer about what happened today or some news story, that's what's going to happen. And, Google, obviously the biggest of these, but we're seeing that with everything, whether it's, if anyone who does Bing, that it's there. The digital assistants we have, they'll give it to you. And again, like Amazon's building this technology into Alexa, which will finally make it an actual assistant,
Mhm.
presumably, because that's what was always missing. You could say whatever you wanted to Alexa, it would understand you. It didn't, if it didn't have that answer hard coded to give back to you, it just would, oh, here's something I found on the web, right? But now it can start doing that. And man, when Apple comes out, and
Mhm.
it will,
Mhm.
guaranteed, in a big way, probably this year, but you never want to predict too much with Apple because
Mhm.
anything could change. But once that happens, once the iPhone has that ability to sort of be your real assistant, and we're not hunting for apps anymore, look out. So what does that mean? It means like everything behind media kind of has to change to some extent. We've got to figure this out, and quick. Is it as simple a matter as media companies striking deals with AI companies, which will include these gateway companies like Apple and Google? Well, Google's already an AI company,
Mhm.
but like these people who are the traditional middlemen, probably. That seems to be what's happening, because otherwise we're going to need an answer to the problem of the content being completely ingested by these systems, and then not getting anything in return with regard to the media companies, right? So that's been a de
Hmm.
facto agreement between media and platforms forever. Is like, hey, we'll give you our content, index it for free, but you give us traffic. Now the second part of that is no longer applies. So what's the deal then? I mean, again, it's probably some money exchange. I know, the OpenAI and others would like to be that amount would be the millions. I think the media companies wanted a B with billions in there. They're going to
With
come
T.
out somewhere
Yeah.
in between. But the problem with the tug of war is that tech always has the upper hand here, because as we've seen with social, with Facebook, Twitter, and others pulling back from sharing news, the media needs them more than they need the media. And that's an unfortunate thing for folks out there in the media to face. But it's just sort of a harsh reality. That said, there's still value to it. And I think there will be many deals made. But if that court case with the New York Times and OpenAI actually gets resolved, if they actually answer this, and there's some way that the law stands on what that information's worth and how media companies should be compensated, that could change things. But I wouldn't count on it.
Was the book industry, do you know the answer to this? They had a lawsuit
Yeah.
against Google. Do you remember the outcome of that?
Google won. Yeah, basically Google, this is the basis of a lot of what the companies that supply the data to OpenAI and others are relying on, which is that the act of ingesting a copyrighted work isn't by itself a violation for these systems. And I'm not a lawyer, just to be clear, but my understanding is that because what they fair use matters. There's four factors that matters, like how much of the work, how much it affects the market, is it transformative,
Hmm.
and I'm forgetting the fourth one. But the fact that you couldn't just get the whole book back generally, and it was
Right,
partial,
it's
was a
limited.
factor. Um, and so that was a big factor there. And so that what that has done is mean these services called Common Crawl is the most famous one,
Right.
which crawl the entire internet and to basically just have these massive data sets that all the LLMs, all the large language models, use to train their models. And so now, because well, it's not because of this, but the telltale part of knowing where your work has been ingested is
Hmm.
that it can be regurgitated. So this is in the New York Times lawsuit. They if you say the right thing, if you cast the right spell with ChatGPT, it will give you
Yeah.
entirely, almost word for word, an article back. Now, to be clear, I honestly think that's the weakest part of the Times lawsuit, even though it's true that this can happen. Generally, it's easy to patch. No one's doing that. To be clear, like five people are doing that, trying to
Mhm.
get bypass the paywall by asking for articles. And it gets away from the real issue. The real issue is that you're taking this content and doing something transformative with it, acknowledging that, like, yes, it's transformative, but doing it at scale, which is really what changes things. Like when we've seen this before,
Hmm.
that scale can be a factor. So if you look back at Napster, this is taking people way back, but this is 25 years ago almost, that Napster was taking all these music and was essentially replicating the experience of going to your friends and saying, hey, anyone got this track? Oh, you do? Great. Let me borrow it. And that's kind of fine on a low scale if it's like just human level and
Hmm.
no one really cares. But once you amplify that up to a certain level, then it becomes violative in some way. Now, again, I'm not a lawyer, because I think technically even the person to person stuff was probably quote unquote illegal back in the day, just copying music from someone. And in this case, it's probably not illegal to copy something and then transform it and serve it up in a different way, looking at just it on a reductive level. But again, changing the market and how something affects the market is one of the factors you can look at in a fair use claim for copyright law. So that is again, I really don't know how the law will rule on this, but things could change quite a bit if this ever actually gets in front of a judge. And I think that's kind of what the New York Times is waiting for, kind of seeing how the winds are flowing when the case gets closer to actually being heard, while also waiting to see if OpenAI is willing to come and change that million to billion the next time it comes calling.
I think the one of the challenges is the same thing that happened with all the other things. Is the politicians really enjoy social media? They really enjoy Google. They it's not about the financing or maybe they're investing or whatever. Not that. It's just that their kids use it. Everybody uses it now. AI is part of the life. It's already out there. The cat's out of the bag.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the things I was wanted to ask you about, because you have your own newsletter. You came from journalism background, and because of the state of journalism right now, newsletters are now back in a huge way. I subscribe to I don't know how many, and I don't read them all, right? But the really good ones I read, and it doesn't take too long to read them, right? It's a very quick read, but it's interesting right now because it seems like journalists are building their own audience, and they start at the New York Times or The Verge or wherever, and then they go off and they create their own audience and maybe their own may or may not even just branch off, spin off, and start their own company. It seems like the AI is going to help those type of folks as well, like yourself, create another movement, another era of journalism where there are these amazing journalists, amazing writers on their own now, creating their own audiences and creating their own businesses.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is kind of a whole movement, I think, born more out of what's sort of happening with media than AI.
Mm.
Again, as socials pulls back, as search in general pulls back, I think we're seeing a correction. And journalists that have a platform can make a go out of it on their own.
Mm.
Again, I think having some experience here, you really have to think through the business model as you do that and sort of how big your platform is. I don't think there are that many journalists, unless they're really into doing what they're doing for the long haul, that can do that quickly. Now that said, there are some, particularly I could name, like, say, Casey Newton, who
Yeah.
does a really good job on Platformer, Jesse Singal, who does Locked and Reported with Katie Herzog, and again, they have platforms, and they took them to these sort of independent places, or they built them up over time. Like Casey, I remember he was a big he was their lead guy on social media in Silicon
Right.
Valley at The Verge before he went out on his own. So if you don't have that platform already, you got to sort of think about, like, as I have, what else can you offer besides just content? Because a newsletter probably isn't going to give you a ton of isn't going to give you anything you can live on, at least not in the short term. Again, if you're serving up great content that people want, you'll find that platform on your own, and building it on your own is super, super rewarding, because obviously it's yours and you'll own it.
Yeah.
And you won't have to lose that platform if you ever depart your employer. But
Right.
again, there's so many different things you can do in media now, besides just serving up content. I think content's essential because it's how you get yourself out there day after day. But there's events, there's sponsorships, there's what I'm doing, which is teaching courses, there's consulting, all of these things. Again, if you have at least some kind of platform and some kind of network, I think are worth looking into and trying out. But I guess my advice for anyone thinking about this now, I mean, certainly now is a good time to do it. But again, there's a lot of people probably doing it
Why
because,
is it a good time right now, do you think?
because it is. a good time to figure out who your audience is. And the same
Mm.
reason I said earlier, this is healthy for media. I think it's healthy for journalists because you probably do have an audience. You've been working at a place for a few years and you've been covering a beat. There's probably people that follow you. You have a network, certainly, and you can lean on that. And you can really just start putting things out there. I certainly wouldn't do the main advice I would say is don't overthink it. Don't waste too much time trying to figure out your business model and what
Mm.
you're going to serve up, because
Start.
that's going to change. Yeah, you just got to
Yeah.
start doing it.
Mhm.
That's really kind of what I did once I decided I wanted to do this. I spent an inordinately small amount of time prepping the launch of the Media Copilot,
That's
and
inspiring.
I threw together a logo in Canva. I picked a name because I thought, hey, AI Copilot. Again, this was before Microsoft decided to slap Copilot on every single thing. So I can't say I was first. I mean, the Copilot idea has been out there since AI has been around, but don't confuse me with their products. Yeah, but I just thought, okay, well, I'll start doing some newsletters and see what happens, and a lot happened. So I'm grateful I jumped in when I did.
As a PR guy, I'm probably one of the few that really cares about pitching to newsletter writers, or
Mm.
being happy when maybe there isn't an article necessarily written in the publication, but it made it into the newsletter. To me, that is a different level of intimacy with that content, where they get it in their inbox, they're reading it, and it's like, well, that, you talk about a quick hit. To me, that's really rewarding from the PR perspective.
Yeah, newsletters are great for a lot of reasons. I mean,
Yeah.
that sort of directness, that sort of intimacy. I love
Mm.
Substack. Um, and just all the writers I follow on there, it is definitely a more personal relationship. Partly because they're coming to your inbox because you get those notifications too, and you see them. Than really probably any other medium apart from podcasting.
What do you, on the training side? What kind of courses do you offer?
So we offer right now to the public, sort of generally, we have two courses. We have a 3-hour AI bootstrapping for media and marketers, and that goes over the basics of AI, a good chunk on prompting because it's all in the prompt, and prompting and prompt engineering. If you can master the basics of that, and if you have the patience to iterate, you will do. You're more than halfway there in terms of using AI. And then we do a good chunk of workshopping with real tools and have recommendations for doing everything from blog writing
Mm.
to making presentations to image creation and tips and tricks on all of them. So that's our sort of good starter package for either individuals or small groups. But then,
Mm.
because there was some demand for this, we also do a sort of a 1 hour crash course. So if you just want 1 hour, like I want to go from AI neophyte to someone who can use this for more than just parlor tricks after about 60 minutes, we can do that. It's really fast. There's no break. We bang out a lot of things. There's very little theory. It's like, here are the tools, here are the main things about prompting. Let's do some stuff, and you walk away with at least a couple of things you could probably show your friends to show that you are an AI quote unquote expert. But we really recommend obviously the 3 hour course for anyone who
It
really
makes
wants some
perfect sense to me
practical stuff.
because the speed of these tools, it's really overwhelming from my, even from my perspective as a huge AI enthusiast, always want to be productive and be on the cutting edge. It's really impossible unless you have someone there, like helping you get there, and being, not, there's so many squirrels and shiny objects out there to distract you right when you get into one. For example, you get really decent with ChatGPT 4, and then you start using Perplexity, and you go, okay, well, wait a minute, that's a different use, really. But then it's another tool in your how many tools are you really going to be using? So It's
Yeah,
interesting.
and I think one of the things we offer and have with part of the classes is, if you're new at this, even if you do know the basics of AI and prompting, you might not be super familiar with all the models and what they're good at.
Hmm.
So ChatGPT is good for a lot. Claude is good for different
Right.
things. Perplexity, which uses a bunch of different models, is good for different things. Why would you want to use Dolly over Midjourney? Are any other image services useful or any good? We've obviously been using these tools for a while. Those answers change, by the way,
Going to say
as you
that.
go
Yeah.
along, and it depends on sort of how you use them. But generally, like, you can come up with a good set of rules of thumb for all of them. And once you get sort of at the finish a class, you'll be able to figure out, oh, so if I want this document summarized, this is probably better. If I want something copy edited, this is probably better. Oh, and there might actually be some sophisticated or more tailored tools for that, even within the thing I'm using. So, yeah, we
Sounds
we
like
we
any
we have it
kind
all.
of marketing person would be interested in this. Any maybe journalist as well. Like, what is the mix of the audience that you have, or some
So
of your?
broadly, it's content creators. But
Okay.
when I first went in, I had journalists in mind.
Hmm.
So we have definitely everything from sort of news gathering to news production and like writing, and then sort of the how to help with your dissemination, and that's mostly like what I said earlier about the social copy and stuff. But yes, marketers, PR people, we found it really really valuable because there's a lot of repetitive tasks. So one of the things we talk about is also multivariate prompting, which is really popular among PR and marketing
Do you
firms.
want to
So this is
explain
what
what that is?
yeah, so it's a thing that you can use in virtually any service, but I think we mostly use it with ChatGPT. And if you have a prompt that works well, you can find what the variables are in that prompt and then essentially get a list. So if you say you have like 10 clients, you can put all those clients and the various variables, whether it's like
Mhm.
brand guidelines or um, things of that nature that you just need to crank out some content for every one of these. You can simply put them all in a CSV file, paste the prompt with those variables clearly marked, and then the list of variables, and then it'll crank it all out for you. So, like within a few minutes, 10 different brand
Amazing.
guidelines will be done for you. Again, need human in the loop, got to be checked. But
Sure.
the tedious work of doing all that, which probably took someone a couple of days, can be done, at least a first draft of it, within 10 minutes. And then, you just spend a couple hours polishing it.
So maybe list. Curious. You probably know. I don't know how many percent of all the tools out there now because they keep just
Yeah, it
exploding.
feels. Whenever I feel like I get over 10%, I go right back down to 5 a few days later. So,
Amazing.
yeah.
Could you list maybe off the top of your head some of your favorites out there? Give the shout out to those that you really think you're going to be maybe using long term and really like and are impressed with.
So I really like Perplexity, and I know this is not news to anyone because a lot of journalists use it, but I
Hmm.
have started using it to complement like research with Google more and more. I think most people are. So Perplexity is pretty good. I'm not convinced their Copilot button does much
Hmm.
other than give me a few extra sources. But I like the way they cite sources. I think if we could standardize that in the industry, that everyone should cite sources like Perplexity, I think that'd be great.
Are they going
So
to
I've started.
replace Google?
I'd more likely Google would just buy them.
Hmm.
But here's the thing about search. Sometimes you want those 10 links.
Hmm.
So as much as, we fear the AI sort of just giving us the answer and zero-click search is becoming a thing, I do think we'll always have, to some extent, the links. It'll just be at a much reduced portion of search. That said, yes, I do think Perplexity or something like it will replace Google, like Google's version of Perplexity will eventually take over.
What
Um,
other tools?
Yeah, I've started using Beautiful AI a little more. Now, I'm not necessarily recommending it, but as presentation services go that sort of auto generate a deck for you, it is okay in terms of getting your first draft out there. And as an online interface where you can put in different clip art and sort of have it redo certain things, I think for most folks it's going to save time, particularly if you're not super adept at like putting together a presentation. I think most jobs now sort of expect that you'll present this to me, and I think most people sort of see the value of that.
Hmm.
Certainly in once you get into sort of a senior role and you find yourself leading meetings more, you need to work on your deck skills, and this can sort of help people level that up pretty good.
I see you using I think you're using AI to generate images on your website for your content. Is that right?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier Dolly and Midjourney. I used to like Adobe Firefly too. After a while, I realized I liked its UX. I didn't like its output. So I do like, and there's another thing I like about Adobe Firefly, which is that it is technically legally safe or safer because all of the stuff they've trained their AI on is either licensed or in the public domain. At least that's what they claim.
Mm-hmm.
So it's if you're worried about getting sued, and you probably shouldn't be because OpenAI guarantees you're not going to be
So
sued and they'll cover your
Microsoft
legal
does as well.
stuff. Yeah, so uh, people shouldn't necessarily fear that, but if you are, it's there. But I also really liked how Firefly gives you essentially a lot of things that you would put in the prompt as sliders and toggles and things like that. So if you want like an oil painting versus a futuristic style versus a widescreen versus a square aspect ratio, etc., all of that is in the UX, which I like. Whereas in Midjourney or Dolly, you actually have to put that in the prompt, and I always forget. And this is the most frustrating thing is if you ask Dali for an image, you forget to specify widescreen, it's square, and you're like, oh, do that as widescreen, and it changes the image. Like, and
Right,
that said, I could download
right.
the square one, do some generative fill, that's allowed, but it's all just too many steps. So, and AI is supposed to solve that. So I'd like, it's just sort of rounding out the tools. So I
Hmm.
do some video editing in Premiere, and I know not everyone is Premiere, but I find their AI tools actually quite good. And there's sort of scene detection, which will find where
Mm.
footage should break, and then there's also an auto reframe. These aren't actually that new,
Mm.
but I found that they do save me time when I am doing clips.
You need
So I
less
find
technical knowledge of Premiere now. You
Well, I
think?
find not so much with Premiere, but certainly for Photoshop. And I've
Mm.
been playing around with their generative fill, which also kind of goes off the rails sometimes. But one of the most notoriously bad things about Photoshop is that if you touch one thing, sometimes you just get lost. Especially even if you have a certain degree of expertise in it, you might get lost. So I like the idea of software being a little more self-aware and sort of becoming, or at least adding a certain assistive quality where it's almost like Kramer in the Seinfeld episode. Why don't you just tell me what you want me to do that's this photo and I'll do it for you, as opposed to you hunting around for a tool.
Yeah.
So the more software can do that, the better for sure. Oh, one more tool I would plug, and I should disclose, I actually do have a business relationship with this company, but it's Mind Studio, and
Mm.
this is a
Haven't heard of it.
great tool for creating custom tools, your own custom tools with AI. So if you do have patience for prompt engineering, because it does require, you got to figure out your prompts and build them into the app,
Mm.
you could build really sophisticated things. So you can essentially turn a multi-step, multi-prompt process into a single app and abstract a lot of that prompting away for people who use the tool. So you design the app, you have the app powered by AI, and then you serve it up to whoever you want, whether it's your company, your customers, whatever. And I find that really, really helpful. I'm designing a lot of the tools for Media Copilot in Mind Studio. And yeah, I can't say enough about the platform. It's just really, really good for building AI apps.
Have you put anything out on the GPT store?
I haven't. Yeah. It's funny. I have some ideas and I've thrown together a couple of GPTs that I don't think are quite good enough, to be honest with you. Like, I think the patience of really crafting a good GPT, again, it requires some patience. And I also don't know don't know if it's going to pay off. You know, you're like,
Right.
there's thousands and thousands of these things now.
You'd be a
Um,
semi first mover, but it's already going to be
yeah,
among.
I should definitely get something out there. It's just a matter of finding the time between the newsletter, the custom tools I'm already building, and things like Mind Studio, the training we're doing. But yeah, I got to get back to it and get something out there because it's just a big platform.
Wow. Well, I better let you get back to work at some point. It sounds like you are a very busy man.
I had no idea I could be this busy. I
That's
mean,
amazing. Very
I long
inspiring.
for the days when I had a 9 to 5, my friend. It was a much simpler life.
Well, in case any kind PR publication picks this content up for us, I was just, do you have any advice either for, do PR people reach out to you and say, hey, include my clients, AI product in your newsletter? Are they calling you right now to get that earned media coverage?
A little bit, yeah. There's some of that going on.
Mm-hmm.
And some of it's okay. I actually really like the media folks who reach out to me though,
Okay.
when they say, "Hey, we've actually got this interesting AI thing we're doing, and I want to get your take on it." And so they're not really looking for coverage. It's more
Mm-hmm.
like they want to see what I think of it vis-a-vis my audience.
Right.
So that's fun because I've gotten to see some really interesting things. And there are some companies that are more sort of media servicey that are offering up some generative stuff
Mm-hmm.
that is interesting. So if like, it's just getting into sort of the weeds of media production, but if you have something like a fast channel,
Mm-hmm.
and fast channels are obviously these things you spin up really quickly, with video content that you can put out on something like a Roku is kind of an
Mm-hmm.
app slash channel. And a lot of content companies have them. CoinDesk had one for a while when it was doing more video. And the thing is, you're always looking for content. You're always trying to like beef that up. And well, what does Gen AI do? It gives you content. So um, there's some companies that help service that content, which is to say you can add these things. Of course, they have to be on brand. They've got to have something to do with the content you're already producing. And there are ways to do that. And I've seen some really interesting sort of takes on that, so that people could sort of supplement or even spin up a fast channel pretty quickly.
Okay.
That's just one example, but yeah, those are pretty interesting.
Cool. I guess my last question is you've given already plenty of advice to people but that are content creators, but any final last words from someone that is in the arena, if you will?
I'd say just don't fear AI. I think it is going to ultimately be just like CMSs and word processors and social media and everything else that changed media. And you can argue one way or the other on what was good, what was bad, but you can't argue the reality of it. So it's not going away, it's here. Have it work for you and do your part, even if you are skeptical, because I think we need skepticism and we need reality checks on this because it's been a lot of hype. So by all means be skeptical, but don't fear it and don't
Skeptically go
not give
for
it a
it.
chance just because of a bias. Be aware of your bias if you have anti-AI bias, and do your best to give it a chance. Yeah.
All right, will do. All right, well, Pete, that's all I have for you, and I'm so impressed. We actually went 59 minutes and 14 seconds. So there you go. That's a
Look
that's
at
a
that.
lot of information, a
And
lot of content.
counting. Well,
So thanks again. I'm going to hit stop on
it's been a
our.
pleasure, Aaron. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and yeah, hopefully some folks will enjoy this and get something out of it.
I hope so. Yeah, let me know when it's live, and I'll obviously share it out.
Will do. All right. Thanks, Pete.
Take